Here's Michael Smerconish.
A long time ago, when I was getting started in radio, the radio station where I was associated, we were honoring the fairness doctrine. It was very late 80s, and Ronald Reagan had already thwarted what would have been the codification. I'm doing this from memory, but I'm pretty secure in my recollection. Reagan said, no, we don't need the fairness doctrine which applied to issues, not candidates. But the idea was that if I was going to discuss a subject of controversy, I needed to present both sides. And even though we were not obligated to do it, initially, I remember we were doing it nonetheless. This subject, the fairness doctrine and the equal time rule, two different things back in the news because of the whole James Talarico and Stephen Colbert interview and the subsequent fallout from it. I'm really eager to discuss this subject with Meg Kinnard, who is a national politics reporter for the Associated Press and summed it up beautifully. What you need to know about the equal time rule, Stephen Colbert says, led to CBS pulling that Talarico interview. Meg, thank you so much for being here.
Hey, of course, Michael. It's great to be with you.
We had put out a feeler for an 8th generation Tennessean. Couldn't find anybody, settled for you with a 7th generation Tennessean pedigree. So I appreciate you. And by the way, also, I got to just say, I love reading backgrounds about people who are gracious in coming on the program. But I get a kick out of the fact, and you set the record straight, that, where was it, at Georgetown, you joined both the college Republicans and Democrats?
I did. I came from a family that had been steeped in politics for a good amount of time. And as a young adult, figured out, you know what? It's time for me, now that I'm a voting age, to figure out exactly where I am on the political spectrum, not just the family that I came from, but what my own beliefs are. And so I figured that the best way to do that was to kind of get to know people in both of the major parties and see what they had to say. And it was a fun experience. I made a lot of friends. And I didn't know at the time I'd be covering political journalism and doing the job that I do now, but I think it gave me a good foundation for kind of listening to all different ideas.
All right, that is the ultimate mingle. We're all about mingling here on this program. You are clearly a mingler. Hey, gang, pick some winners and go for the gold while you watch the Winter Games. Bet on ice hockey, bobsledding, speed skating, skiing. Yes, you can wager on curling. It's time to play. Join me now on the BetParx online casino and sportsbook app, where there's always another way to win. New casino users score up to $1,000 bonus back in your first 24 hours. Plus, get 250 bonus spins on Good Heavens or Lil Demon Mega Collectum over the course of 10 consecutive days. 250 bonus spins. Play all the hot slots like Huff and Puff, Cash Eruption, and more with the BetParx online casino and sportsbook app. You can play real casino games for real money and bet on all your favorite sports right now on your phone, including the Winter Games. Have some fun. BetParx online casino app, where there's always another way to win. You've got to be 21 and in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Maryland, or Michigan. New users only. Terms and conditions apply. See the site for details. Casino bonus has to be wagered. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Will you help me put in some context what's just gone on with Colbert and Talarico? And I, in particular, want to drill down and distinguish for the audience the difference between the equal time rule and the fairness doctrine.
Right. And you hit on it at the top that the equal time rule and the fairness doctrine kind of get lumped together a lot of the time, but they are two separate things, one of which is still around and one of which isn't. Of course, this all came to the fore earlier this week when Stephen Colbert was on his show and said that he had an interview with James Talarico that CBS lawyers had said would not be airing because of concerns over this recent guidance from the FCC when it comes to late night programming and that equal time rule. It is a rule. It's not a law, but it is part of what has been FCC policy governing the airwaves of our country. And every time I write about this, every time I talk to people about regulatory policy when it comes to broadcast, they're flabbergasted that this goes back to a law from 1934, from a policy instituted in 1934. So nearly 100 years ago was these rules that came out to talk about, okay, what is not okay, what are the rules governing what you can put on your air. And for Stephen Colbert, he said that the recent guidance from FCC talking about the equal time provision that requires broadcast to consider all candidates competing for a certain race if they are going to be putting out information from those candidates, it's different for late night programs. And that was something that FCC Chairman Brendan Carr put out guidance concerning just last month, saying that, okay, this hasn't really necessarily always come up for late night shows like Stephen Colbert or daytime talk shows, more of the straight news broadcasts where we think about just watching coverage of different events. But for these more long form interviews, the FCC has said that it is interested in having that also fall under this equal time provision. And so for Colbert, he said that those concerns led the network to kick his interview with James Talarico off of the air. Important to note, none of this governs what happens online and on streaming platforms. And so that's exactly where Stephen Colbert did put that interview, where it's been viewed, last I checked, more than 5 million times, which is about twice what his usual peak audience would be for something like that. So it's gotten a lot more eyeballs. But that is what's happening here with equal time. The fairness doctrine, as you pointed out, hasn't been around since, I think, President Reagan got rid of it in 1987. But that, as you noted, did cover issues and not specific candidates. And it was, at the time it was instituted, decades before that, a concern about spectrum availability and how much airwaves there were really at that
Scarcity.
time. And so right, exactly. And so the late 80s, President Reagan said, that's not really a concern. There's a lot more available. Now we have cable, et cetera. And so that went away.
Meg Kinnard from the Associated Press. I should point out that there's pushback against that, and I think the CBS perspective is to say we didn't say that you couldn't. We said that this might trigger a violation of the equal time rule. I have to ask, and I feel like I should know this because of what I do, even though these things don't apply to me here at SiriusXM. But I didn't know there was still enforcement taking place of the equal time rule. Is this new?
It does seem like we're in a new phase of it. There have been a number of exceptions to equal time through the decades. When I was doing research for that What to Know piece that you mentioned, I came across a number of instances where either specific to a certain show, like Jay Leno, for example, in the mid-2000s, there have been a lot of times where concerns over equal time have come up, but it really hasn't led to any sort of punishment or an enforcement action in regulatory speak. And it's also important to consider the different kinds of programming that this does or doesn't apply to. If I'm a reporter and I'm covering live breaking news in front of me and it happens to be a political rally, that's not necessarily something where if I were on broadcast, that my station or network would need to think, okay, well, we need to show just as much of a rally of all of the other candidates, because that is a live news program. But when you think about the different kinds of programs that there are, the equal time there have been instances where it says, okay, this specifically does apply to, for say, if you're going to have a politician host a show, host some sort of a entertainment-based program, but it's on a network, and that person is competing for a political office, then the network is supposed to take into consideration at least offering that space to people also in that race with that candidate. It doesn't mean they have to. They can't make someone come on and perform a similar task in terms of hosting a show, but at least they do have to offer. The same is true for selling airtime, for political advertising. They have to offer that space to other candidates competing in that race. They can't make them take it, but at least it has to be on the table. But there has been this conversation around these late night programs, and does it count? Is it the same kind of thing when someone like Stephen Colbert or another host has a candidate on their program? And recently the FCC says, yes, those should be considered the same sort of space, and we would like to see this apply to them as well. And we also have heard recently from FCC Chairman Brendan Carr that they are looking into The View, which often has political candidates on.
I want to ask about that.
Right.
Okay, so just to keep this straight, the equal time rule applies to broadcast, radio, and television, correct?
That's right.
And then within broadcast, radio, and television, does it matter? I think you've already answered this, but I want to underscore it. What kind of a program it is? Specifically, The View is a talk program, an interview talk program. Does that apply? Is that different than a newscast?
That is something that the FCC is trying to say recently, that yes, it should. There's important language in the way that this is all laid out in terms of where the exceptions are. So newscasts, that if you're covering news of a particular candidate, that's the news in front of you. You don't have to go and make up news about other people in the race. If it's and this is a quote from the FCC, if it's a bona fide interview program. So exactly what that is, I think you would have to ask the FCC, but at least in times past, that's been shown to be an interview program that's kind of a one-on-one, think like a news magazine format, that would be considered something that's an exception. And also coverage of live events or documentary, like I mentioned. But if there's always been this kind of gray area, like I talked about with a candidate hosting a show, a pseudo entertainment sort of space. And that is where the FCC is saying that, okay, well, that's where these late night programs are. We don't consider those to be a bona fide interview, again, in their words. And so therefore, we are thinking about pursuing potential enforcement actions if we see that happening.
Meg, two more clips that I want to play. I referenced the interview that Colbert did do with Talarico, which, as you point out, aired on YouTube. Here's a snippet.
Now, here's the thing. I don't usually say this to a guest, but if people are watching this right now, it's because they found us online on YouTube. I did an act of the show that's on tonight explaining why. It's not the first time you've caused some drama. FCC opening probe into The View after appearance by Talarico. Do you mean to cause trouble?
I guess the point that I want to underscore is that this is YouTube, and consequently the government doesn't regulate it in the same sense that I'm here at Sirius XM. This is satellite. We're talking about broadcast, television, and radio only.
Right. That's an important distinction. I had a lot of questions come up when we did the first iteration of our coverage of this, with people questioning exactly where interviews appear and does that matter. And you're absolutely right. Streaming, satellite, online, that's a different space. And so that's why we saw Colbert immediately taking his interview there, which seemed to be the plan from the top, as you see with that, not necessarily from the top with the planning of the interview, but from when he conducted it, as he introduced Talarico there.
Brendan Carr last night was on Fox News. Here's a piece of what he had to say.
To the audience watching who's not familiar with what this equal time rule has traditionally always been about, explain.
Yeah, the equal time rule was put in place all the way back in the 1950s by Congress. And again, the idea is you don't want these legacy media gatekeepers picking the candidates that are going to win primaries or general elections. It's about more speech, more information, empowering viewers. Again, step back at what happened during the Biden years at the FCC. That was actually weaponization. That's when they threatened to not revoke the license for a Fox broadcast station because of programming they didn't like on Fox News. Cable, it's when Democrats went after cable companies and pressured them to drop Fox News. That's weaponization. What we're doing now is simply applying the law on the books in an even-handed manner. And for people that benefited from a two-tier system of justice during the Biden years, it may feel like weaponization, but that doesn't make it so.
Meg Kinnard from the Associated Press. When you leave me in a moment, I'm going to have a conversation with callers about whether we need any regulation. The days of scarcity, I think, are over. You know, you've got so much choice in the marketplace today, and I'm not asking you to weigh in with an opinion, but just to help me summarize the arguments on both sides as to whether, and well, actually, look I'm actually playing the role of fairness doctrine. Even though the fairness doctrine doesn't exist, I am asking my guest from the Associated Press to help me present both sides of the issue relative to the equal time rule.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. There isn't a scarcity issue in terms of how things can be broadcast these days. The internet, streaming, there are so many different options for podcasts. I mean, just think about what you're doing right now. We see coverage and different news entities coming into our sphere all the time because there are different ways to be presenting things, whether you're a network who's going online or whether you're someone who's just going online and that's where you are. So there are a lot of different locations for this to be happening. And I think the FCC and Brendan Carr are in this space where they are an institution that is tasked with regulating what they can, what's in front of them, which is broadcast. And so trying to apply these rules narrowly in a space that is steeped in politics, that there's politics underneath it as well. And this is the Trump administration, and clearly we have seen different moves being made, and there's been some criticism over why they're making those moves. Are they motivated by politics? This is an active campaign. The Texas primary is early voting is underway, and it's wide open. So on the Democratic side, so there are a lot of things to consider. And I think as we move further into this midterm election year, it will be very interesting for people like you and me to consider how this is playing out and to keep posted on other developments that we may see happening in this space.
Meg, that was awesome. Thank you so much for your expertise, your reporting. I appreciate it.
Call me anytime. Thank you.
Okay, I will do it. Meg Kinnard is a national political reporter for the Associated Press who wrote this great piece on which I've been relying. What to know about the equal time rule that Stephen Colbert says led CBS to pull the Talarico interview. Hi, everybody. It's Michael Smerconish. If you like this video and you want to see more like it, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. We post videos every day tackling the biggest political issues from the middle of the road, from an independent perspective. There's no suiting up in partisan armor. It's all about evaluating the available information and then reaching a fair conclusion. Also, check out the Mingle Project playlist. You'll hear and watch more about my passion, how we need to come together and establish common purpose to bridge the divides in our political discourse. Subscribe now. I'll see you tomorrow.